morning, everyone. Welcome to the October 15th, 2019 board meeting of the California High-Speed Rail Authority. Could I actually call the roll, please?
Good morning. Director Shank. Vice Chair Richards. Director Curtin. Director Lowenthal.
Here.
Director Camacho. Director Miller.
Here.
Senator Bell. Assemblymember Arambula. Chairman Donza.
Here.
Director Perea.
Here.
Director Guillemetti. We have a quorum.
Thank you. Could I ask us to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please? United States of America, and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice. Thank you, and I just want to make sure that Board Member Lowenthal, can you hear us okay on the microphones?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So before we start the public comment, I'd like to do three things. First of all, it's delightful to see Board Member Shank back and on your feet. So welcome. Thank you for joining us in person. And also delighted to welcome to his first meeting, new Board Member Jim Guillemetti. Welcome, Jim. Would you like to say anything? Not that you need to, but
I appreciate the governor's trust and faith in appointing me. I had 16 years with the California Transportation Commission, and I'm ready for a new challenge. So thank you.
we appreciate you agreeing to continue to serve the state of California and appreciate your experience you're going to be bringing to the board. So thank you again. Board Member Guillemetti was sworn in before the meeting, and Board Member Perea was sworn in at last meeting, but we'd like to do a formal swearing in if we can at this point.
That'd be great, yeah. Thank you. And I could, Mr. Chairman, take the liberty to just introduce a few people. Very happy a lot of my family members could attend today. My son, Henry T. Perea, will be swearing me in today, former Assemblyman, and his wife, Yahida, is here. Yahida, thank you for being here. My daughter, Annalisa Perea, is here. She's a trustee, also elected trustee for the State Center Community College Board in Fresno, Madera. And her partner, Alicia Isaacs, is here, and she's one of the chief of staffs in the State Assembly. So thank you for being here. And of course, the lovely Grace, the mother of my children. So thank you for being here. It means a lot to me. She's a teacher and took the day off, and just watching her prepare this weekend to take the day off. It's amazing what teachers have to go through. So thank you. So Henry, if you could come up.
Thank you very much, and welcome to your lovely family here, and appreciate again your ongoing public service. Okay, we have 4 public comments. Okay, and if there are any more public comments, please submit them on these green cards. Bonnie, do you have any public comment cards at your location?
No, I don't. Thanks for asking.
Great. So we have 4 comments, and we start with Roland, who just walked in.
Good morning, directors, and thank you for the opportunity. So this morning, I'm going to be talking about transparency. Specifically, multiple members of the public have been in front of this board pretty much on a monthly basis about what happened to the website, the authority's website. Every single record of board meetings, land use committee meeting, finance committee meeting prior to January 2018 are gone. The latest development is that all the information that was presented to the communities between San Jose and San Francisco and between San Jose and Merced, that's the committee meetings, the community work groups and everything is gone. Now, I'm going to make it very simple. What I'm asking the board is to direct staff to address this situation by the next board meeting. And unless this actually happens, our next stop will be to the legislature. And we're going to be asking our elected officials to suspend any more funding on this project until this matter has been addressed. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Keith Dunn.
Thank you, Chairman and Directors. I'm here today simply because I have a unique opportunity within 1 week to thank your new director for his 16 years of service on the commission, where we got to recognize him for his long-term service. And then today I'm very pleased to welcome him to serve with you. Mr. Gilmetti is a leader in the community, but also on transportation, has been for years. And I can't let this opportunity pass without saying thank you for your leadership, your friendship, and we look forward to working with you moving forward. So thank you.
Thank you. Matt Trevor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Matt Trieber. I'm the Community and Economic Development Director for Madera County. And I'm here not just representing the county, but a committee known as Why Madera. I'm made up of the cities of Chowchilla and Madera, as well as Madera Unified School District and other community organizations and government agencies. Wanted to just take a brief moment and thank you today for the opportunity to speak and just let you know of our committee's involvement and engagement in the project. We're excited for that and certainly looking forward to and asking that this body continue to invest in the valley, in the Central Valley, and certainly oppose any legislation that may come before the state to move funding out of the valley, complete that section that's under construction that started in Madera, and get Merced to Bakersfield done. So wanted to take that opportunity. Also wanted to thank your staff, Diana Gomez. She's been excellent to work with and going through this process. She's been sitting down and listening to our committee on a regular basis lately. So just wanted to come up and thank you and your staff, and certainly ask for your support in completing the construction that's commenced in the valley. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last public comment card, unless any have come in since I started, is Mr. Schwagel.
Greetings, HSR Board. David Schwegel, U.S. High-Speed Rail Association, with 3 items. First, when I worked at High-Speed Rail Leadership Summit in the Silicon Valley last September, I was very impressed with the attitudes of compassion and the industry engagement that I saw. Those traits are absolutely essential to the metric that matters, the expedited delivery of state-of-the-art infrastructure, making optimal use of taxpayer funds. Second, driving the economy forward with infrastructure is the theme of the ASCE California Infrastructure Symposium, Friday, April 3rd, 2020 at the Hilton Arden West. Barry Broom is confirmed, and Mr. Chairman, ASCE looks forward to your favorable response to their invitation to speak. Third and finally, the next time you open up Microsoft Office Suite, be it Word, PowerPoint, or Excel, make sure that you remember not only that Microsoft is investing in high-speed rail, they are hosting the Cascadia Leadership Summit November 6th through the 8th at the Microsoft campus, featuring high-speed rail speakers from all over the world taking a deep dive into a $42 billion HSR project along the Portland, Seattle, Vancouver, BC corridor that's going to generate a whopping $355 billion in economic benefits, as well as having the comparable carrying capacity to a 10-lane freeway. And it certainly beats the alternative of $108 billion just to add a single northbound and southbound lane along the 276-mile stretch through the state of Washington. What should be especially interest to this board with regard to that conference is, number one, how those brilliant Cascadia minds were able to get tech to invest in the effort, and two, the innovative messaging techniques they use with regard to bringing cities closer together from the standpoint of addressing real-world challenges like cancer research. So thank you, and see you at Microsoft next month.
Thank you. And I don't see any more public comment cards, so thank you, members of the public. And now we'll turn to agenda item 1, consider approving the September 17th, 2019 board meeting minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes? Is there a second? Any additions or changes to the minutes? Okay, would you call the roll, please?
Director Schenk,
Yes.
Vice Chair Richards,
Yes.
Director Curtin,
Yes.
Director Lowenthal,
Yes.
Director Camacho,
Yes.
Director Miller,
Yes.
Chairman Donza,
Yes.
Director Perea,
Yes.
Director Gelmetti. Motion passes.
Thank you. Okay,
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I just noticed
the
Board Member Schenk is making the point that on the minutes from the last meeting, while it indicates she was not present, for clarification's sake, she was present via remote location. So we want to make sure we make that clear. Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, great, thank you. Right, can we move on to the important item number 2, the interim train operator side-by-side, the early train operator side-by-side interim analysis. And if I could ask our CEO, Brian Kelly, to help frame this before turning it over to Frank, that would be great.
Sure, just reminding the board members that this is one of the 2 reports that were requested, one from the F&A committee on the refined business case for the Merced to Bakersfield stretch. The second is this side-by-side work that was requested of our ETO, our early train operator, to do an analysis of essentially the wisdom or the prudency of keeping the investments that we have with our available revenue in the valley versus to other corridors, 2 other corridors specifically in the state of California. This report is coming back to the board in 2 steps. You may recall, the first is a qualitative analysis. That is the summary that you're going to hear today. The second is a more quantitative analysis when the further ridership and revenue numbers are a little bit further developed. I want to say that one of the tricks about doing this at this time, or one of the key challenges, is when this report was requested, there was presented no specific set of projects versus which to compare, leaving the investments in the valley to somewhere else. In other words, there was no finite or specific list of where diverted funds would go. So that's a key challenge, and you will hear from the ETO how they approach this under that scenario, and it includes working with the state agency and talking with stakeholders up and down the state about where their next key investments would go based on revenues they have and revenues that they'd be getting from other state agencies. So I just wanted to clarify that that's the scenario you'll see on the scenarios that our team analyzed, and you'll see that in this summary. The full qualitative report is a lengthier report than just this summary, and it will be released this month before the end of the month. That is in a final review right now. And so, again, the quantitative will follow on top of that. The other thing, just to be clear on, the couple of constraints there, this analysis was done based on an estimate between the 15.6 billion that is now our 119-mile Central Valley budget that includes also the completion of the environmental documents statewide, and the 20.4 estimate to complete the entire Merced-Bakersfield stretch. That's a difference of $4.8 billion, and that's how, that's the quantification, if you will, of what is, quote, divertible. It's important to remind the members that our estimate of cost for that is a P70 estimate. It's a probability 70% estimate based on the risk analysis done, so it always can float, so we got to be mindful of that. Anyway, I think with that, this will make a little bit more sense as you go through the scenarios. Our early train operator team is here, along with our Chief of Rail Operations, Frank Vaca, who will present this. And again, the quantification part is coming in the step 2 of this report to the board.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. As Mr. Kelly articulated, the board made a request in May, the May board, May 2019, for a study, side-by-side study, and to just put a finer point on Mr. Kelly's comments, the side-by-side is to evaluate the Central Valley versus San Francisco Bay Area and Los Angeles-Anaheim corridor with regard to future investments and any benefits that may be better spent in one corridor versus the other. The study's been working for a substantial number of months now since May in order to bring you this first report on the qualitative analysis. It'll be presented by Mr. Mark Evans. I'd like to introduce him. He is the CEO of DB Consulting USA, and he will take the lead in making the presentation that is completed here.
Thank you, Frank Vaca. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and fellow directors of the California High-Speed Rail Board. I'm pleased this morning to walk you through the qualitative summaries that we derived from doing this two-step approach to looking at side-by-side comparisons of investments in high-speed rail in the state of California. To give you some context, we did some work back in 2018, and that should be on slide 2 if you're looking on paper. That study done in 2018 was looking at an operating expenses versus a revenue outcome or a revenue from ridership comparison to see what it would cost if we were to start some early interim service in the Central Valley. We looked at several scenarios there. For instance, Madera to Poplar, Madera to Bakersfield, Merced to Poplar, Merced to Bakersfield. We also looked at the Peninsula Corridor, which would start at 4th and King and run down through Gilroy, and looked at the same elements there, operating expenses versus revenue as an early standalone operation. What we derived from that early study was that the real cost-benefit analysis lied in the Central Valley, where we could definitely enhance the transportation modes offered, the speed and the length of the guideway as compared to the Peninsula Corridor, which was actually incremental to their existing Caltrain services. So we used that study as a basis for starting our side-by-side study. If you go to slide 3, this funding chart was provided in the project update report last spring, and we bring it to the board's attention again because this is the genesis of where the $4.8 billion topic arose. If you look on the left side of this chart, the federal, state, regional commitments, this $15.6 billion identified there would be to start at Madera on the north end in the Central Valley and run service down to Poplar. That included the systems, but did not include the rolling stock procurement that would be required. If you look at the second bar, the 17.9 then picks up Madera to Bakersfield, so one station more on the south end, including systems and rolling stock. And then if you, to the far right, you see total Merced to Bakersfield of $20.4 billion would be the requirement, a cost requirement for that section. And that would include all the rolling stock and systems. At the time, then, it was identified that to go north to Merced and south to Bakersfield and from the Madera to Poplar segment would require $4.8 billion. And the question arose, could that $4.8 billion be used elsewhere in the system along either the valley to valley or in the phase 1 section of the high-speed rail planned network? So in May of 2019, as already was stated, the board commissioned a study to take a look at these three corridors on a side-by-side basis. So corridor NorCal is San Francisco, 4th and King to Gilroy. Central Valley segment is the Merced to Bakersfield segment, and then the Southern Cal, LA segment would be the Anaheim on the south side to Burbank Airport on the north side. And one other reminder to the board is that the $4.8 billion could only be used with the understanding that it complies with Prop 1A requirements and restrictions, as well as it must be used in the high-speed rail corridor itself for eventual high-speed rail operation. So we drew on the outcome of the early study. We used that as the basis to start our study, and on slide 5, we started an outreach program looking at talking to the stakeholders along the alignment, both in SoCal, Central Valley, and NorCal. And those would be agencies such as Metrolink, Lausanne, the Los Angeles, San Obispo, San Diego, Rail Authority, LA Metro, Caltrans, Caltrains, CalSTA, and the San Joaquin Regional Rail Commission, which includes the ACE and San Joaquin feeder lines on the north side and the Central Valley. So we've developed some scenarios, 1 through 4, which I'll walk you through on the next slide. And we've completed, as Brian said, the qualitative analysis, or we could also call this the early indicator analysis of where we think the study will lead, and the quantitative portion is completed. So I will refer you now to slide 6. And this slide's a little more complex, so I'll walk you through how you should read it. Starting on the left side, we have 3 rows. Row 1 is the Peninsula Corridor, row 2 is Central Valley Corridor, and row 3 is the Southern Cal Corridor, the Anaheim to Burbank. The next column over is the type column, so we're looking at service type that could be offered, and when we talk about service, we talk about the summary of trains per hour during peak. And the next is cost, the cost for that scenario. Finally then on scenario 1, is the how the system exists today with the service that's provided today. So in NorCal, you have 5 Caltrain trains running per hour per direction during peak. In the Central Valley, there's the San Joaquins, which are running up and down the Central Valley at half a train at peak per direction, or 7 trains per day. On Southern Cal, then you have primarily the Metrolink system with 0.5 express trains, 3 regional trains for 3.5 service trains per hour per direction. So that's what exists today. In scenario 2, then, there are investments being made. Yes, do you have a question, sir?
Yeah, this is a little hard to read for people who are not deeply enmeshed in this sort of thing. So 7 trains per day, okay, I'm sorry, per day. And in Southern California, you're looking at 3.5 trains per day or hour?
That's during peak time per hour per direction.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. Okay, great. On scenario 2, then, there are investments being made today along the 3 corridors. In the NorCal corridor, there is the electrification project, which is providing overhead catenary systems and solutions so they can eventually transition from diesel to electric trains. Of course, in the Central Valley, it's the ongoing California High-Speed Rail construction project. And then in Southern California, there's some SCORE funding, which is being put into place in Southern California at around $900 million, and it's actually then bringing the system up and upgrading the system. Also, the bookend projects are invested in scenario 2.
Mark,
yes, Brian.
I just want to be clear with the board members on scenario 2. Scenario 2 includes not just the existing funds that the entities have or funds that they are bringing to improved service, but for example, in the Peninsula Corridor, that scenario 2 includes Caltrains, federal, and investments that we are bringing to the electrification of the Caltrain service. That's about on the order of $713 million that we are bringing to that service today under scenario 2. And then down below, not us, but for the Southern California corridor, the State Transportation Agency last year awarded, mostly out of SB1 funds, awarded about $876 million for improvements on the corridor down there. So that scenario 2 includes both dollars they have plus state dollars they've already received either through us or through the State Transportation Agency to expand their services today. Okay, that's scenario 2.
Mr. Chairman, a question, basic. 6 total, or is that in addition to what is going on today, or is that the total that would be under scenario 2?
That's the total,
Total.
per hour, per direction, at peak.
So can I ask a question? So scenario 2 is what's currently being invested or planned to be invested as compared to scenario 1, which is what's happening today.
Let me try that. 1 is an existing service.
Correct.
2 is the existing service plus known investments they're making to expand existing service.
Okay.
And then 3 gets into where any additional high-speed rail funds would alter the services. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question? I didn't realize we were going to take questions this soon, but going back to page 4, there's a statement about using Prop 1A funds that would have to be designated only to high-speed rail. Could you explain that a bit?
Well, there are restrictions within Prop 1A as to what those funds can be used for, the type of transportation, the speeds, the distances, and the preparation of the infrastructure for high-speed rail.
And to put a finer point on that, the bond law itself that was passed called out specific areas where the bond funds can be used. The rolling stock, for example, must be rolling stock that's capable of going at least 200 miles per hour under the bond law. Similarly, the cap and trade law, which was passed subsequent to the bond law, I think initially in 2014, and then extended in 2017, those funds also are designated for Phase 1 purposes.
Did we not use any of Prop 1A money in the Los Angeles area when we did some of the improvements for Metro Station or some of the overpass?
Yes, but they're all in the Phase 1. Those were consistent with using the revenue for Phase 1 purposes.
So anything on the Phase 1 corridor is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yes.
A finer point to that, Mr. Curtin, is that it's got to be invested in the Phase 1 corridor, plus it's got to be a project element that we would eventually need to use as part of the high-speed rail system.
Say that again, I didn't.
In addition to having the investment be in the identified Phase 1 corridor,
Right.
it needs to be project elements that the high-speed rail will need to use for the full build-out.
Okay, got it.
So then if I could direct the board's attention to then scenario 3. So this is the first opportunity to then provide, to use the $4.8 billion in actual either preparation for or for high-speed rail service along the Phase 1 corridor. So in the Peninsula corridor, by investing the 4.8 into the peninsula, we could increase the service by 2 train trips per hour per direction. So that's the difference between scenario 2.6 and scenario 3.8. In the Central Valley, it would just again further towards the goal, and scenario 3 really would just be furthering towards the goal of scenario 4, which is full high-speed rail service. And then in Southern California, we're also picking up 2 express trains there, going from 6 to 8 per direction per hour. 2 points on the Peninsula corridor. The $4.8 billion is primarily would be primarily used for moving the Union Pacific tracks, providing space then for 2 electrified tracks from San Jose to Gilroy. That's primarily where that money would go. There are some other elements along the right-of-way that it would support. In the Southern California corridor, it's primarily providing flyovers along the right-of-way between the Union Station and Anaheim, where it would be grade separating and actually corridor separating from the freight railroad there for passenger rail. In the Southern California scenario, we're still looking at all diesel or alternative technology, meaning non-electrified and not high-speed rail technology, if that investment was to be made. You can also see on the Southern California corridor under scenario 3 that the $4.8 billion would fall short of the $7 billion that we estimate would be required to complete those elements. So it would help, but it wouldn't actually finish or be able to complete those. And then scenario 4, yes,
Again,
please.
this is kind of, the meat and potatoes here. I'm a little baffled by the $7 billion. That's what would be required to complete or extend the investments that were in the current phase 2. $7 billion more would improve the corridor to the extent you addressed here with 8 total. Is that correct?
We're saying that our estimate, along with the authorities' support on the estimate, is that it's approximately $7 billion to complete the preparation for high-speed rail in that corridor.
Okay.
That's the estimate.
And would that include catenaries?
That would not include overhead, catenary, or rolling stock.
Basic infrastructure.
Basically, in Southern California, it's the addition of 1 to 2 tracks between Burbank and Anaheim Station, the addition of railway flyover bridges to separate freight from passenger traffic. It increases the regional train service, non-electrified, to be added between Burbank and Irvine stations. The cost of any rolling stock is not included in that estimate. Additional through service for Union Station is not included, and we estimate that still to be at around $7 billion.
Go ahead.
I'm with Danny here.
So I know it's awfully hard to read. It's not hard to read if you
Is
know how to read it, but
is it the $7 billion over scenario 1 or over scenario
it's
2?
over scenario 2.
It's over scenario 2.
So my question here is, I took a look at the report from the MetroLink, and they're talking about, I guess they're mandated now to move from diesel to either some sort of high-speed rail, and they're looking at a non-catenary, which I assume is battery and, sort of a hybrid hydrogen fuel cell type train. So that means that once that was completed, you wouldn't need the catenaries, which of course gets a little confusing on the other end for us. But I'm also thinking that when I'm looking at this, I wouldn't expect us to be paying $7 billion extra for that.
If I could.
I understand that. So
Yeah,
whatever
yeah.
we would invest would be a portion of that total cost.
So the $7 billion is coming off of our projected estimate in terms of our alignment and our infrastructure requirements. So that's constructing 2 new tracks between Burbank and Los Angeles. It includes significant construction at Burbank and Burbank Station Airport. It includes additional tracks all the way from Los Angeles Union Station to Fullerton Junction. It includes an enormous amount of bridges over and under the Union Pacific, the Burlington Northern Santa Fe line. It includes the work we'll need at Arctic. So what it does not include in that $7 billion is the rolling stock and the catenary. To speak to Metrolink's comment about the train sets, again, I'm not aware of any battery and or other related non-overhead catenary train sets that would comply at this time with our Prop 1A requirements. So they would not be eligible for
Comply in
funding.
what sense?
Speed. Any vehicle we buy has to be able to go 220 miles an
But
hour.
not any vehicle they buy. Right.
But they can't use our funds, right, correct, yeah.
Okay, but they could use our funds for the basic infrastructure to build that rail
The
set.
infrastructure that I just identified.
Right.
Right.
Okay, that's important.
But that was, that infrastructure was evaluated as part of scenario 3.
Got it. That's very helpful, by the way.
Sure,
I've been
anytime.
baffled looking at this. So my assumption is that, we would be investing in that corridor for the basic infrastructure that we could use, be a utilizable segment. Having said that, I don't know what their capabilities are, but I do know that, sort of the prime directive in high-speed rail was to look for places where we could get leverage funds. And we did that in the valley with the federal funds. So that was important. But if I'm not mistaken, the other consideration, this was like the prime directive, where you can leverage the most funds for actual construction is where we should be looking. So I want to put that on the table as something we should be thinking about. It's not in here in the sense that, this is preliminary, I get that. But it's an important concept. So if they're doing electric, that's another plus. But anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Could I think it's important to just try to align, since the MetroLink study was brought up. They submitted a report on a series of capital expenditures they would like to essentially extend Metrolink service in the corridor between Burbank and Anaheim. Only Metrolink service. It would not extend high-speed rail service until you get into scenario 4. But the point I want to make is we've estimated that scenario 3 at about $7 billion, and we have some crosswalking to do, and the reason the quantification stuff comes later is the Metrolink report came in for us a little bit late in our analysis, and so we'll work through it. But I want to point out to the board members that while we are identifying a $7 billion capital investment in that corridor that would exclude high-speed rail service, their own report has it at $9.4 billion, also excluding high-speed rail service in that corridor. So I just want to be clear that any diversion of available funds, it will not cover the capital needs to either achieve the Metrolink report or what the ETO has analyzed here for service improvements between Burbank and Anaheim. Short of high-speed rail service being eligible, that will require more, as they'll get to. And I think as we get through this page and on to the next, you'll see sort of the outcomes of each for the corridors based on the expenditures that would be made here.
So tell me, see if I got this wrong, because I did look at the report. I had asked for it when they were completed. You sent it to me, and I finally looked at it. It's just almost as hard for me to read as this one here, but maybe a little harder. Everything on that particular report was the kind of infrastructure that we would be developing if we were to develop it independently for high-speed rail. At least that's the way I understood it, that this was the original conversations with high-speed rail. These were the improvements that we would be looking for.
Are you speaking to the Metrolink
Yes.
report? As Mr. Kelly indicated,
there yet.
I don't think we've had a time to really evaluate that.
But the second part that we just need to acknowledge is we will need catenaries for electrified service in that section, and neither their report or the $7 billion estimate here includes that infrastructure in that corridor.
So what we're saying is you'll need catenaries to buy trains to run at 200 miles an hour.
And they will never run at that speed in that corridor. But, you know, to get the benefit of the ridership, both for us and expanded Metrolink ridership, you have to make investments beyond just that 44-mile stretch. And so our intention is to have electrified high-speed rail running through that corridor and into other parts of the state at high speeds. That's the benefit of the ultimate service. And so ultimately, you will have to have catenaries in that corridor for high-speed rail.
Okay, I get that part. Okay, rather than beat a dead horse on this, that's a conversation that could be expanded. But the basic infrastructure is the infrastructure that we would be running on, assuming that at some point there would be catenaries. If that, in fact, is a correct assumption, and I think from buying the train sets that can run 200 miles an hour, that might be the correct assumption. So I got that part. At least I understand it.
Okay, looking at scenario 4.
If I could just
Oh,
say,
sorry, Nancy.
I'm not sure that's a correct assumption, that infrastructure supports a high-speed rail, the Metrolink report we're talking about. So I think you're going to...
Let me try to help. Hang on, Frank. Let me just try to help. I'm going to go through a little bit of this in my CEO report later. Unlike prior CEO reports, it's a bit of a PowerPoint. I want to walk through the board about where we are. But just to be clear, we, the California High-Speed Rail Authority, are currently doing the environmental work for all of the infrastructure between Anaheim and Burbank. And we are doing that work on our dime, not just for our service improvements, but also for the service improvements of Losan, Metrolink, and freight facilities. In short, what we're studying there is taking 2 tracks down there now that are shared by freight and Metrolink and Losan, and expanding those to 4 tracks, electrifying 2 of them, and electrifying them so we can ultimately serve the area too. And expanding from 2 to 4, electrifying the 2, leaving 2 for freight, and moving both the Metrolink service and our passenger service on new freed up tracks so we can get through there in increased speeds over today's service through that corridor. And so we are going through that work together. I view this as a partnership. I view what we're doing with Metrolink and Losan as a partnership. And it's very important that we get that environmental work done so we can really figure out what are the capital improvements that we need to pinpoint and get done, not just for our improvements down there, but theirs as well. So some of the capital improvements for sure will be shared. Some in the Metrolink report we are still evaluating. As we come back on the quantitative side, we'll have a better sense of what those are. But I want to be real clear. We are working together in that corridor to make things work down there. And another important partner down there is also BNSF, who, to make it work for either passenger service, Metrolink, Losan, or ours, we need BNSF to relocate some facilities, and we're working on that process as well through the environmental document. So there's a lot of work going on down there to benefit all of the services in this corridor. And I just want to be clear, that partnership is underway. We are working through it. As we get that work done, we'll have a better sense of exactly what infrastructure needs to be done for what entity. But essentially, we're looking at widening through the existing right-of-way that primarily serves freight today in shared tracks for passenger to be a much better service for passenger rail, not just ours, but also Metrolinx and Losan. That work is underway now, and ultimately we'll figure out the shared construction strategy and cost strategy as we move through the environmental document.
Brian, it's apparent that some board members, even the press, have the copy of the report coming from Los Angeles. Yep. I certainly don't have one, and I'm sure there are other board members that don't have one. Could we expect a copy of that then?
Absolutely.
Very good.
Okay, thank you.
Well, no, I'm sorry. I thought
Yes.
Nancy was still on there. No?
No.
Okay. So I agree with you, Brian, on the EIR. That's mission critical. But it doesn't really change the fact that the work that at least I saw is our basic infrastructure work that we will be utilizing. So that was the question, rather than getting to the catenaries. And I appreciate all the work with the partners on the corridor. And I think, considering the latest executive order, the greenhouse gas and other emissions are mission critical to anything we do. And, you know, improving freight is going to be critical to that. So I'm with you on that 100%.
Okay, thank
Sorry.
you. Just a reminder on scenario 3 as far as what is really moving the greenhouse gas needle. So in NorCal, in the Peninsula Corridor, there is electrification project funded and ongoing now, which will support that. And in Southern California, there is not an electrification program yet underway. On scenario 4, so then we're comparing again the 3 corridors and looking at the change in service. So from 3 to 4 in the Northern Cal or Peninsula Corridor, we do increase by 2 trains the service, and now we're running true high-speed rail service at that point, but it's an additional $3 billion investment is required, and that's cumulative with the scenario 3 investment, so it would be $7 billion total cumulative for Northern California to get to high-speed rail service, and it still would not be connected to the Central Valley. It would be a standalone service running from Gilroy to 4th and King. In the Central Valley, then, at $4.8 billion, you're looking at high-speed rail service, 1 train per hour per direction during the day for 18 hours, and it would start at Merced and run through to Bakersfield. And then the Peninsula, or the Southern California corridor, now you're looking at an increase of 2 trains being the high-speed rail service, both electrified, and that would be an additional $5 billion on top of the $7 billion in scenario 2 or 3, so that would bring you to 12, approximately 12, and that does not include rolling stock, and it does not include other regional investments that would be required in the area, because remember, we're just strengthening the Burbank Airport to Anaheim section of the network there. If I can then refer you to slide number 7, and so this is what Brian was talking about. It's kind of like, well, what do you get for what? So if you're looking at the Peninsula Corridor, you get maybe 110 miles an hour in the future with electrified, without the rolling stock, and you're getting 77 miles of shared corridor. So that cost would be excess of $4 billion. The thing to look at here, the 3 columns, ridership revenue, greenhouse gas or GHG benefits, and expected congestion relief, those 3 columns will be the subject of the quantitative analysis, which is coming next, the next step. In the Peninsula Corridor, you're also just looking at incremental improvements because you're running now 2 high-speed rail trains at 110 miles an hour maximum in a pretty mature corridor because Caltrains already has a fairly extensive service there. In the Central Valley, then you're looking at full high-speed service at over possibility of 220 miles an hour. It's an independent, grade-separated corridor with good connectivity on the Merced station on the north end with the ACE and San Joaquin lines, and then connectivity down into Burbank on the south side. So 171 miles of dedicated high-speed rail
So
system.
question there?
Yes, sir.
So you say 220, which is the maximum capability, right? But operationally, I think over here or somewhere else, but I know in the report, one of the reports earlier, we're really talking about 180, operationally speaking.
The system will be designed to operate at 220 high-speed rail. The 180 came up because as you do the interim service, which is a commuter stops, that there are more frequent stops for the San Joaquins, and consequently your acceleration, deceleration is that you probably will only get to about 185. However, the system is designed, and once valley to valley begins, it'll be a 220 operation.
Okay, so once you have the Pacheco Pass or some
Right.
version of that, you can operate at a full 220.
Full 220, yeah. The 180 is because of the more frequent stops that the commuter train does.
And that would be to Bakersfield to Merced.
That's correct.
You use the word, and I mean, I certainly understand what incremental means. I'm sorry. Oh, incremental versus significant. I mean, how are you using that?
Well, it's a bit of a subjective term, but incremental means they already have existing service in the NorCal, in the Peninsula Corridor with Caltrains and commuter rail service. So we're just adding, if you can see from, well, you'd have to go back to the previous slide, where we were looking at train service of 10 total train trips per hour per direction during peak, and that's incrementally up from 8, which is incrementally up from 6. So we're just adding more lines, but you're also pulling passengers off the existing lines as well as introducing new passengers into the system. So incremental means until it's more quantified, it means it's not binary, it's either or, it is that you're adding service to an existing service. So the reason we say significant in the Central Valley is because basically the high-speed rail service will take the place of the San Joaquin line going through Central Valley. So it's binary in that case. The same thing for Southern California, then we're looking at train speeds up to 125 miles an hour at full high-speed rail service at a cost of $12 billion plus, including regional investments, which we feel are needed there for a 44-mile segment. And again, incremental improvements in ridership and revenue, incremental expected congestion relief, because those are already pretty mature corridors. But once the entire system is linked, then it becomes a part of the statewide network.
Are those terms of art in the industry, incremental versus
we were
significant?
trying to describe what the impact, the magnitude of the impact. And so we could have said on a 1 to 5, or we could have said
I would have
major,
preferred a
minor, but we
number,
said
to be honest
incremental.
with you, but it only is the impact on those corridors. So an incremental impact on a large corridor could be more significant from greenhouse gases, et cetera, than a significant impact on a less traveled corridor.
It could be. I mean, Frank, you want to?
Well,
Yeah, but you get my point, because it's sort of, when you read it, it looks like significant and less significant.
Yeah.
But in the bigger picture, they're all pretty significant.
I think, let's take an example of Northern California. It's already an electrified alignment. They only have 2 diesel trains operating, so it's incremental when you go to full electrification to Gilroy, because you're only adding 2 trains converting from diesel to electric. From a ridership perspective, because it's a closed system, because we haven't gone through the Pacheco Pass yet, what you're doing is you have a small incremental ridership improvement because of electrification between Gilroy and San Jose, and it's not significant because you're not bringing new riderships from outside of that region because Pacheco Pass isn't through.
Right.
So that's why they designate that as incremental. When you have significant in the Central Valley, what you're doing is going from 7 diesel trains operating at 79 miles an hour to 18 high-speed rail trains operating at maximum 180, you would say, and going from full diesel to full electric. You have a significant difference in terms of the impact. And it's similar on Southern California. It's incremental because, one, you're only adding 2 additional trains, but 2, you're not even converting to electric. So that has even less impact from a greenhouse gas perspective.
Okay,
And those are terms of, used until the quantitative, but that's what we would expect the similar corresponding numbers to come in at.
Okay, so I'm looking forward to the quantitative analysis because my impression is there's going to be a larger increase. Maybe, back to the 10 trains an hour. And when you're adding incrementally from large segments, the cumulative impact of increasing, incremental ridership from large markets could be pretty significant. So that's why it's a little bit subjective. Yeah.
One last one. You, Frankie, used the word ridership. I just want to ask, somewhere in the report you talked, there's a statement that we're picking up 1.6, 1.8 million riders. How many of those are new riders?
Roughly half, roughly half.
Pardon me?
Roughly half, 50%.
So what we're doing is are we taking Amtrak's ridership? Because that's about their ridership.
Well, we're predicting the ridership at the time when we would replace Amtrak in the Central Valley, the San Joaquins, plus the enhancement to the ACE and San Joaquin feeder lines on the north side.
So the line is really picking up half of what you are projecting.
Yes.
And you are projecting only that other 800 and some thousand people are you're creating a monopoly in a sense because you're planning on taking out the Amtrak run.
That's correct.
I see.
So again, I say, I hope everybody gets to read the report because the preliminary report that I read shows millions of new riders on that track. It's a shorter track, 44 miles, but these are people who will be not riding their cars in Southern California. I'm talking about millions, at least that's the Metrolink, up to 5 million in the next 10 years. And that opens up all kinds of corridors with LA Metro, Union Station, Anaheim Station, et cetera, et cetera. So
Yeah.
that's why I just want to, incremental is a little misleading on that column. Substantial, significant, I get, but 1 to 5 would have been good in terms of numbers, but when you get that analysis, I'm looking forward to it.
That'll be part of our quantitative analysis. We'll provide that.
While I appreciate the qualitative analysis that's been presented so far, I would also ask that we have some underlying understanding of the air quality of the regions as well. Coming from Fresno, where we have the worst air quality in our nation, I think it's important that we acknowledge that there is a difference between the Bay Area and all parts of our states. And so would just ask that that gets included in your report when it's quantitatively analyzed.
Okay. All right, thank you. The next slide is slide 8, and now we've already touched on some of these results here, but preliminary findings in NorCal is that the Northern California requires regional investment in addition to the high-speed rail investment, meaning additional fleet and capacity, signaling systems, et cetera. The Caltrans business plan highlights these capital requirements for non-high-speed rail rolling stock and rail systems. The high-speed rail operating expenses would significantly, we believe, exceed revenues as a standalone corridor because it doesn't get the benefit of connecting to the rest of the network, the rest of the high-speed rail line. And there are marginal benefits from standalone high-speed rail service until it does connect to the Central Valley. Our preliminary findings in Southern California, the minimum high-speed rail infrastructure cost alone exceeds almost 1.5 times the $4.8 billion, as I showed on a previous slide, up to $12 billion for full high-speed rail service. The full regional benefits of high-speed rail investment can only be realized with a concurrent new regional capital investment. Again, if you're improving the Burbank Airport to Anaheim portion of this network, and that's the only piece you improve, then you have a lot of capacity that doesn't get used if you're not enhancing the connecting parts of the network.
Mr. Chairman, so I see the analysis in the north and the south. Is that okay in the central? Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. Incremental ridership benefits will be significantly higher if all the connecting services are concurrently improved with the Burbank to Anaheim's high-speed rail section there, segment. Preliminary findings for the Central Valley full build, the benefits if we do connect then Merced to Bakersfield with the planned enhancements to Ace and San Joaquin on the north side, that will create significant value in the Central Valley. More train miles, they're almost doubled what we're offering now, reduction in more than 90 minutes travel time, more efficient cost per mile, and certainly complements the Ace and San Joaquin enhancements. Again, these sound a bit subjective, and will provide more detail in the
So that's kind of where I'd like to make my point.
Yep.
That both of these, less so, I think, in the north because there's less connectivity. That's more of a closed system. But both of these are based on, I mean, any of the actual analysis and the improvements are significantly based on complementary enhancements to the systems that they're connecting to, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, and I'd like to see that explored, as much as possible in the next report, because the clarity is, I read through the Southern California one, Metrolink, and there's a significant, and it's indicated here, but it's not really clear in either, and it maybe in both of them. I know the enhancements to ACE are planned, they're substantial. I'm not familiar with San Joaquin. But the connectivity, the value of this is the connectivity right now in Merced. Until there is a Pacheco Pass, all of this improvement in the valley means nothing if there's no connectivity at Merced or somewhere around Merced, between whether you're going to Sacramento or to San Jose. The key point is that it connects and goes all the way. So, and it's not quite the same in Southern California, although we'll hear, I think, according to the chairman's, the CEO's report, the connectivity to a new line into Vegas will add substantial value. So the potential connectivity is vast there. But the existing connectivity, the one thing, I'm from New York, I'm kind of used to going into Grand Central Station, actually Penn Station. You get off there and there's just trains going everywhere. There's subways going everywhere. Union Station is beginning to look like that to me. I like to fly into Burbank, take the train down, get off there, and I can go almost anywhere in LA area now. There's going to be a vast improvement in that if we upgrade this line. So I want that as much as possible considered. That's going to be the basis for the discussion going forward, at least in the legislature as I'm aware of, because I've been made aware of it. It's not that these are new lines, but they carry tons of passengers. And the more you can get from, just think about flying into Burbank, hopping on the train, whether it's a Metrolink train or a high-speed rail train or any other train, Amtrak, Losan, getting to Union Station and anywhere in the Southern California, in the LA Basin, is really the connectivity question. And to me, those are the two questions that we need to grapple with. And the same in the Valley. There's no point in making any upgrades, essentially, in my mind, in the Valley if we don't connect to Merced and improve those corridors both to San Jose and to Sacramento, short of the Pacheco Pass tunnel. So I want to make sure we really get a sense of that.
Okay, thank you. Slide 11, then we look at the preliminary findings, Central Valley, a partial build. What if we do not complete that work there that's currently planned to go north to Merced on the north end and then south to Bakersfield? Is that basically you will have a infrastructure there between Madera and Poplar Avenue that will not have rolling stock to operate on it because it's not included. The funding is in the 4.8 for the rolling stock. Limited use of the infrastructure then, so we're not using it to its full potential. There's cost associated with the connections and the BNSF line to make sure that between Madera and Poplar Avenue fit to diesel operation. And so though since you can't run high-speed rail electrified rolling stock, you'll have to run something else on that corridor. The connectivity at the north end, then so you have a problem with the ACE line terminates in Merced, so you have to then pick up those passengers and carry them down to Madera, where you'd put them on some kind of non-electrified service through to Poplar Avenue. We think in that scenario, there's also limited or minimal environmental improvements or positive impacts to the environment.
Mr. Chairman, can you quantify the throwaway costs that were referenced in the third bullet point?
Okay, so there's connectivity that we have to make, again, on the north side at the Madera station. There's connectivity to get the people from Merced down to Madera. Depending on how we invest in those, that cost will then have to be, those will have to be upgraded and replaced when high-speed rail services ran.
So I guess my question is, are those costs then being added to the northern and the southern portion of the segment, since those costs will need to be bore if we do not continue building in the Central Valley?
So primarily, the throwaway costs would be associated with having to maintain a diesel operation on the Madera to Poplar line. So you have to have a freight signal system, completed rather than our high-speed rail signal system. And anything associated with a diesel operation would be a throwaway cost once you did upgrade to high-speed.
I think on this specific question, though, yes, we can quantify those costs, and we will.
And finally, we haven't mentioned ARA funds, and I think it is pertinent to the discussion to make sure that we meet our federal obligations. And I'm wondering if there is some analysis or a way we can include that into the northern and southern portion of these segments.
Our funding is taken into consideration on the diesel operation. We'll comply with our grant, but we will make a note of that in the report.
I apologize. I lost track of your slides numbers, and I was looking at 12 while you were talking about 11. Could you just go through quickly? The high-speed rail service in the Central Valley be delayed until funding for Valley-to-Valley project, which is the tunnel essentially, if I'm not mistaken. I'm looking at Frank. Or the connection in Merced.
Which slide are you looking at?
Back to 11.
So Valley, you'd have to fund from Bakersfield. If you don't spend the $4.8 billion in Central Valley, you'd have to fund the Bakersfield to Poplar. Then you'd have to fund up through the Y and through Pacheco Pass, and then you'd have to fund the modifications all the way to San Jose. So you have Gill Road to San Jose.
Okay.
So
Okay, I get that part. The limited use of high-speed rail infrastructure in the valley by San Joaquin trains will resemble current situation with only minor improvements. Okay, so that, we're talking about 2027 by the time we're done constructing it, and then whatever time period we have after that to figure out how to get through Pacheco Pass. So that's a pretty significant time period. And then the throwaway cost, I kind of missed that point. I didn't, because I was trying to find the slide, sorry. What's the throwaway cost to build connections?
Similarly, some of the infrastructure for diesel operation, since it would not be electrified, we wouldn't have high-speed trains, because it's not funded. Then you'd have to put in a signal system that would accommodate the freight service. It'd be,
And
so
that signal system would be,
throwaway.
okay, so you wouldn't need it afterwards.
You'd have to rebuild, that's right, with a high-speed rail system. That's just one, I'm sure, we'll, as we go through the
Was that
details.
connected to the 119 segment you're talking about, the ARA funding?
No, the throwaway cost, as I understand it, is the BNSF connection. It's the
There's that
high-speed
connection
rail to-
also. There's a number of elements. There'll be a
Okay.
connection, there'll be the signal
can I-
system, there'll be, and we can articulate,
Frank.
detail that.
Just, again, the lead-in on this is consequences if the connections to Merced and Bakersfield are not completed. So if we don't do those things, there's some other things we have to do. We have to connect the 119-mile stretch that would be left there, non-electric. So somebody could use it. You'd have to do new connections on the north and south end of that.
Okay.
And then once we were in use electric, assuming we got funding later to do Valley to Valley, those would be throwaway costs because we wouldn't use those. And so the issue is, this is what happens if we don't move forward, or we stay at the 119.
Okay, well,
there's some consequences there.
I'll take exception to that last sentence, but I'm absolutely 100% with you on the first part of that. In my mind, there's just no way we don't build to Merced or some version of that. Because as I said earlier, that is an abandoned sort of asset if you do not connect. So having said that, I don't think, well, anyway, we'll leave it at that. Because my perspective here is that whatever we do, mission critical right now is the 119 miles. And second to that is connecting to Merced in some capacity. I will take exception to some of the other things that are being said at some point. And what I'm interested in comparing is not the Central Valley to the Southern California corridor or to the Northern California corridor, but completing a Central Valley element that goes from Bakersfield to Merced, but might be a different system than a catenary system at this stage of the game, so that you don't have to get off in Merced to continue your train ride to San Jose. And if I'm not mistaken, you know, there's new diesel, low emission, high speed diesel that does 120. So comparing that to the proposal is what I'm interested in finding out about. So that you have a one-seat ride from Bakersfield to San Jose, not a two-seat ride, which everything I know about trains, everybody says you gotta have a one-seat ride to really build capacity in terms of ridership. And the same with going to Sacramento, a one-seat ride. So if you electrify a portion of it, you have to get off the train. And there's no real looking at Merced for electrification north. So those are the kind of questions that have come up in my thinking about this, and I think they're important.
May I, Mr. Chair? So I have a little different take. I'm a little bit, you know, just in the macro sense, I understand where and why we got to this place was because there was the initial motion back in the spring about, you know, let's try and figure out with our partners in Southern California and our partners in Northern California and Central and our system, what makes the most sense, and are we proceeding the way that we should? We asked our experts to go back and take a look at that, and I think they've provided to us an analysis of what that is. We have comments on that analysis from our board about whether or not you agree with it or not, but I do think the issue of diesel, in my mind, is off the table. I'm not interested in a diesel system anywhere. And secondly, high-speed rail is what I'm interested in, and I think that we can talk about this in a way that doesn't rob Peter to pay Paul, and to look at where we might have opportunities for our partners and this system, because we all understand the benefit of it being a built-out system. We obviously don't have the right resources for that now. That certainly doesn't mean we won't have them in the future. And we need to be mindful of that, that this is not just all the money we have, and this is all that we're doing. We have a project here that will have legs and will go forward, and we need to keep to that, and to keep to that faith, I should say. I want to thank you for this. I understand it, and I appreciate the work that you've done, and I look forward to next month's additional information.
You know, I reviewed the 2018 business plan, and Brian, we signed, the board agreed, and you assigned a letter stating that we have learned from the past, our mistakes from the past. And I think one of the mistakes that you laid out, you mentioned, was the mistake of maybe prematurely signing some contracts that put us behind the gun, and we were not allowed. I mean, we're still paying for those things. Whether or not, I was not on the board, and many of us were not on the board, but whatever the decision was, I'm not going to try to second guess that, and we might look at it today and say we're paying for those mistakes. But when we start to look at electrification, those are electives. Those are not necessarily things that the feds are mandating that we do. So it's not Peter stealing from Paul, because this is an elective. If in fact it were mandated that we do this, then we would be putting the halt to all of the project. But when in fact it's an elective thing that we're doing, then we can in fact hold back on that for a later date. We may pay more money for it, yes. But we have that opportunity to do that if in fact we can get more of the system up and running.
Okay, can I just ask that we go to your plans for next steps, and then I want to ask Brian just to conclude with where we go from here and when we should expect the next stage.
Okay, yes, so slide 12, proposed next steps are to complete the qualitative report. It's in final draft now, and it'll be to the board before the end of the month. Continue the quantitative phase, which includes, again, continuing to work with our stakeholders that I've mentioned early in the presentation in both Northern California, Southern California, and the Central Valley to make sure we have all of their let's say, their thoughts and ideas captured in that final report and analyzed, to summarize the high-speed rail capital cost and show regional benefits and needs quantitatively, as well as estimates of ridership revenue and greenhouse gas emission and congestion reduction, and generate that final quantitative report in the first quarter of 2020, so between January and March.
Could I ask for a slightly different element on the GHG and congestion benefit? Rather than one versus the other, which is sort of the way this has been portrayed. I believe there's GHG and congestion benefits that could be maximized, especially in the valley, depending on what we do. If it's where we spend the money in this corridor versus this corridor versus this corridor, and each one has a discrete amount of GHG gases, if we spent the money slightly differently, we might maximize those potentials. I don't know if you're capable, or at this point you can look at that, but that's the way I want to look at it. But there's elements here that we could maximize if we use a little more imagination. I mean, this is not an either or, and nobody's talking about building a diesel system. Nancy and I want to talk to you a little bit about that. This is preparing for a high-speed rail system, but for the next 10 or 15 years, this may be a better way to go until we do get the money to go valley to valley. Maybe we'll have to spend a little more to electrify, but to electrify at this stage and not take the benefit of using money in the Southern California corridor, which I think is screaming for it. I don't mean politically, I mean in reality. I think the peninsula is probably more mature in that sense. I think that would be a mistake, to have 15 years of development without getting the greenhouse gas reduction, the congestion relief, the freight movement improvement, all of the things that were requested more or less in the report. I think that would be a mistake. And it's ultimately going to lead to high-speed rail. In 15 years, that high-speed rail may not look like a catenary system. I'm not sure. The Japanese are supposed to be done by 2027 with a maglev system through mountains and over bridges and whatever else at 150 miles. That's pretty impressive. And by the time we're ready to go, maybe that's something else. That's just what I'm saying. This is not a black and white issue here.
Just real quickly, in the interest of time, when you're talking about show regional benefits and needs, does that include economic development and housing?
No, does not at this time.
No.
Not at all? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I have a few comments and questions. I'm just getting up to speed here, and I'm matching up today's report with the report that we received earlier this morning. And I'm getting a feel for what the genesis of this secondary report was from that May meeting. I mean, just looking at the numbers, it appears that obviously the question is $4.8 billion and where it makes sense to use these dollars. So part of what we're talking about is going Merced to Bakersfield. Then your scenarios lay out all the different options and the costs under each scenario. And it just, based on what I'm seeing is, and as Brian had indicated earlier, looking at the Metro report, even though one of the scenarios talks about $7 billion, even the Metro report says it might be higher. So, we come back, at least in my mind, to the $4.8 billion and where is it best used. Now, I look at the preliminary report that we received this morning, and under preliminary key observations, Brian, I don't know if this question is for you, but I mean, they make some preliminary observations. Do you anticipate in the final report that report being counter or contra to anything that's on these key observations before us today?
That might be a better question for the ETOs doing the analysis.
Are they still
in terms of whether the qualitative, if I understand the question right, whether you would anticipate your qualitative findings changing after the quantitative part is complete.
Correct.
So again, you're asking about the incremental versus
yes,
yes, and I don't see that from our study so far that we'll see any real new information that swings the early indicators in a different direction.
Yeah.
Again, that's why we use the terms incremental versus kind of
Okay.
standalone or significant.
Okay. And I understand that the board wants to see, obviously, the final end product. But what I'm asking for, and I'm still feeling my way through, Mr. Chairman, this board and this process and how it works. But I would like to be in a position in November to go up or down on this issue of whether we go Merced to Bakersfield or move the dollar somewhere else. You know, my experience, on these types of boards is just because you have an action item in front of you doesn't mean that one, you approve it. You could disapprove it, or you could give alternate direction. But I think it's prudent, for the sake of time, which we don't have a lot of, is to at least put ourselves in a position in November to make an up or down decision, and then see where it goes based on the final presentation that's given to us in this other report by KPMG. So I'll just leave it at that. I don't know in what direction we're going to be going at this point, but I just would like to be in a position next month, not to talk about things, but I'd like to be in a position to take action if it makes sense.
Mr. Chairman?
Tom?
I appreciate the comments of everyone today, and yours at the end, Director Perea. I think that one of the challenges we have is and I appreciate your wanting to move towards an action on this also, Director Perea. The challenge is just the vast volume of data, some of which we, at least on Bakersfield Merced, is what is being worked on this business case report. I don't have cause to believe as we're sitting here that all of that information is going to even be available by our board meeting in November. And that is, I'm sure, disappointing. However, as I said in the Finance and Audit Committee meeting, I don't think that in the interest of time that we can rush the value and the importance of the data that we're collecting and interpreting. And so without asking our financial advisor to step forward, because I think what I've just said is pretty accurate, I don't think that we're going to have the required information to complete a business case study, which I think ties in with everything that we're talking in this agenda item. We're not going to have that information available from the ETO with a large amount of, with enough time to fairly evaluate it and assess the balance of the information that we need to complete, or they need to complete, the business case report. And I think all of this ties together in terms of which direction staff comes to this board and what action we take.
So, are there any other comments, or I have a
I
suggestion?
have one more, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Danny, and then I have a suggestion.
I'll try to keep it quick. You mentioned you think the basic issues aren't going to change, but what I've heard up here is we haven't had a time to evaluate it. So I'm going to ask you, is 5 million new riders in the Anaheim-Burbank corridor in the next 10 years an incremental or significant change?
As we've indicated, we'd have to really review that study and see where those numbers came from. They
No, I
might be
heard that.
appropriate.
I heard you,
Yeah.
and I agree with that, but that's not what you said. You said you don't think there'll be any significant change. And I'm saying what I read was pretty significant. And it's only a question of whether you're looking at a percentage increase or a real increase or decrease, or however you want to do it, whether it's greenhouse gases or riders or getting people out of their cars into trains. They're significant. Now, on a large scale, they may be less significant than in the valley where they're doubled, for instance. But that's what I'm saying. When you read this, it leads you to a conclusion that the valley is the only answer. And I'm not saying anything except we have to get from Bakersfield to Merced the most efficient, fastest way we can. I agree with that. But there are other elements that we could do at the same time and get more value for our money than we're getting now. That's my point. And I want to assure Assemblyman Arambula, there's no way I will agree with any project that does not go to Merced and connects to Merced, because everything else that we've done in the valley would be almost worthless.
Just one comment that I think is relevant for the conversations going forward. At some level, this is a key decision for the board on how we move forward, and the board makes that call. But we do exist in the world that's broader than just the board, including the legislature and the governor's office. And all of that is key communication going forward. I'm just going to tell the board from my perspective, and I have been involved in transportation policy for 25 years now, that I think one conclusion you can fairly reach when you read the MetroLink report, you read our ETO summary, you read the ETO final report, you read any other report you want, is that everybody has worthwhile investments that can be made. And what we have to do to transform public transit in California is we have to move forward on expanding the pie that enables us to make investments to get electrified, high-speed rail done, consistent with the mandate of the voters of California, and improve regional rail services in a way where it's connected and better service for all Californians. And so primarily the way we're going to get there is not having a tug of war over existing revenues, but figuring out how we make an sensible, expanded revenue approach work so that we can do this. The problem is when you talk about regional investments in certain areas and the obligation of MetroLink or Caltrain or anybody else, their mandate, their mission, their duty is different than ours. It's different. And so we have to find a way to use not just our resources, but all resources available in the state of California and local resources to build a system that works together. And so it's too simple to say, you know, it doesn't have to be electrified now. We can come down and electrify it later. We can do this in the short term. The answer is we have a different mission than they do. They have a different mission than we do. And we've done shared investments where we can to develop their system in a way that would also accommodate ours. The challenge is we're running out of our money. And there is other money available, and we need to have a broad approach to this that utilizes the best state resources available, not just high-speed rails, but others, to figure out targeted, smart investments to deliver the transit system that people want. The other thing I think is worth noting is that the promise and the potential of electrified high-speed rail connecting cities and regions around California is the idea that it can transform and lift public transit. And you can look at almost any metric you want in the state of California, and public transit ridership has been generally flat. That is an unpopular thing to say, but it's true. It has been generally flat. And if we just continue to make the same investments without changing the game or transforming how these systems work together or what the experience is for the rider, you're never going to change that trend. And so I think these are the complex challenges that are before this board. And what I hope this board can get to is a uniform position on how we go forward to meet our mission, the mission that the voters of California have given us, and make it work in a way where we are well connected with the regional services. Many of you have had the pleasure of riding high-speed rail elsewhere, as have I. And the beauty of it is the speeds between the cities and the regions that you can achieve only through electrified high-speed rail changes the way passengers move. And we see in corridor after corridor people moving from flying and driving to a high-speed system that is then well connected with a regional or local transit system that makes it all work together for the transit rider. That's the objective this board has had from day one. It's been laid out since day one, and it's still the mission that we have to fulfill. There are certainly financial challenges to get there, but there is a path. I just think the pie will have to expand for us to ultimately get there.
Mr. Chairman, it's Bonnie.
Please, go ahead, Bonnie.
Yeah, just a quick question about slide 6. In the Southern California corridor, I think it was Brian who said there was an investment of $876 million from SB1. I was confused because I thought SB1 didn't allow for rail, so I didn't know what the investment consisted of.
No, SB1 not only allows for rail, SB1 included the largest public transit investment in the history of the state of California in terms of one funding measure. So SB1 was primarily targeted at two things. One, fixing roads and bridges that were in poor condition and really focusing on improving the conditions of the highway. And two, making a major investment to the tune of nearly $1 billion a year in public transit and transit facilities up and down the state of California. So commuter rail is certainly a recipient of SB 1 dollars, and there's a specified program called the Transit Intercity Rail Capital Program that awards grants every 2 years. And the last grant award that came from SB 1 through that program to Metrolink was $876 million, what they call their SCORE program for regional improvements in that area.
Well, it's kind of interesting because that means they've already gotten the investment, the kind of expanded investment you're talking about. I do have one other request, and that is even before the quantitative analysis comes back, if that slide 6 could be developed further so each scenario is consistent and has a very clear number of trains per hour, per day. It's unclear. There were a number of questions about that from my colleagues, and I'd like to see it improved.
We're nodding in agreement with you that you can't see, Ron.
Oh, no, but thank you.
Thank you. We'll try and take this portion to a close and move on to the CEO report. First of all, I want to thank the early train operator and Frank and your team for getting this conversation going in a way that was getting all of the information that we can have at this point on the table and getting some feedback. So I'm glad we did it in 2 stages. What I'd like to ask is that we come back at the next meeting with you will not complete the quantitative analysis, but I'd love for Brian and your team to come back and say, here's the timeline with which we believe we will have the information we need that the board is requesting to make an informed decision the way Vice Chairman Richards was describing, not just from this work, but from the KPMG work. I just think it would be helpful for all of us to have clarity about a timeline and when we're going to get to what we need. And I would ask that we do that in a way, Brian, that is not killing the team and our advisors, but as expeditious as possible so that we're delivering against what we know we need to deliver. Is that doable?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would say I think what might be very helpful for the board is not just what's coming. There's 2 things that are coming down the pike that are instructive here. One is we do have a 2020 business plan due in February, a draft that will have to be released, and our intention all along is to incorporate the results of these studies into that as we discuss and describe the vision going forward. So I think that's key. The other thing is there are key point-in-time decisions that are going to be helpful if we're to move forward on certain elements that are coming up sooner. Some of those I'll talk a little bit about in my CEO report. But I think what I can provide is a timeline for key decisions that need to be made for us to continue the work, and then making sure that we incorporate all of this analysis that's going on into a description of our vision in the 2020 business plan.
Okay, and your sense is that those timelines will coincide. We're not going to be late on a business plan as a result.
We're not going to be late on a business plan this year.
Thank you. Okay, thank you again. So, Brian, can we turn to your CEO report now? Sure.
Mr. Chairman and members, thank you, Brian Kelly, Chief Executive Officer for the California High-Speed Rail Authority. Before I get into the PowerPoint presentation that I wanted to roll through with the members today, I wanted to take care of a couple of sort of important housekeeping matters, if I could. The first is I'm going to ask a couple of people to come forward because it's important to me that the board be introduced to the newest staff members of our team, our executive team. So I want Melissa Figueroa, Alicia Fowler, Meg Cederoth, and Christine Inoue to please come forward. Members, as you know, we are always in a bit of a state of transition at the High-Speed Rail Authority organizationally, and I wanted to introduce the board to our most recent appointments to the executive team. Beginning to my immediate right, Christine Inoue is our new Director of Engineering here at the High-Speed Rail Authority. I'm happy to say she's the first female Director of Engineering in the history of the California High-Speed Rail Authority. I had the great pleasure of working with Christine when I was the Secretary of the Transportation Agency, and she headed up some very difficult tasks for us there, including how we're going to wrestle with properties on the 710 freeway down in Southern California, and she just did a great job. So she's a great addition to our team, and she's doing great thus far. So Christine Inoue. Next to her, a familiar face for many of you, Meg Cederoth has headed up our sustainability efforts on the consultant or contractor side for some time. I asked her earlier this year if she would come over and take over the position of both Director of Planning and Sustainability for the agency as a state employee, and I'm happy to announce that she did agree to that. And so Meg and Christine are here working for us now, and Meg is filling the position of Director of Planning and Sustainability, Meg Cederoth. Next to her is the elusive one. This is Alicia Fowler. Many of you know that our longtime Chief Counsel, Tom Filenz, has moved into a retired annuitant role for us at the authority. That was very, very important to us because we wanted to maintain Tom's institutional knowledge, his expertise, and his general great way of working with everybody. But at the same time, we brought in a new Chief Counsel, and that is Alicia Fowler, who has been the counsel for me and Secretary Annis when he was the secretary over at the State Transportation Agency. Alicia will be joining us, we think, on October 28th officially, making the transfer over, but she was announced as our most recent appointment as Chief Counsel. And again, like the engineering role, she'll be the first female Chief Counsel in the history of High-Speed Rail Authority. So, Alicia Fowler. And lastly is Melissa Figueroa. Melissa and I have worked together for several years. I first met her when she was working with Joe Simidian, State Senator Joe Simidian, and I was working for Darrell Steinberg. Later, when I became the Secretary of Transportation, I stole her from another agency to help us with our massive communication issues in the world of transportation between the CTC, Caltrans, DMV, high-speed rail. There's a lot to communicate about. And so she's been speaking for me for a long time, and asked her to come over and join us. She's a former reporter at KCR, former producer at KCRA News here in Sacramento, has a very good head for media strategy, and I'm thrilled to welcome her, Melissa Figueroa. She is our Director of Strategic Communications. Okay, thank you. Thank you all. Okay. The next thing that I want to just comment on here, because it was something that was mentioned in the public testimony, and again, this came up when we were in San Jose. It's been, it was again referenced earlier today and brought up before on where we are on what's available or what's not available on our website. And I want to just repeat for the board members that the California State the California High-Speed Rail Authority, just like every other state agency in California government, has had to go through a process to ensure that the documents on our website are ADA compliant. And so that involved us taking in some documents that were not, and then remediating several of those documents so we could repost them and put them back up. We have had to restructure our website's presentation generally. If you go and take a look at it, I think you'll see it's an easier website to navigate, easier to go through. There are some documents that have come down, and several of those we are remediating and intend to bring back up. Any document that helps tell the story of what we're doing, things like board resolutions, board directions, all of our business plans from the past, these will all come back up. Summaries of our environmental documents will be available as well. And so we are in that process. We had to certify by July 1st that the things available on our website were compliant with the ADA, and we did that. And again, we maintained several of our business plans and other documents, and we are still going through older documents and seeing what we can remediate and bring back up. So it's a process that, again, is not isolated to the California High-Speed Rail Authority, but is one that every state agency has had to do. And we are working through it, and my job is, you know, I can't allow documents to go back up that aren't ADA compliant, and so there's a process involved there. It's also worthwhile to note that we do inform folks on the website if they can't find something on the website, there is a path to receive the documents, either through a PRA or contacting our communications office directly. We try to accommodate all of those requests. So again, it's a work in progress as we go forward. Our commitment remains high on transparency, as you all demand and I believe in, and so we'll continue to work through that. But I want to just be clear on that point. And then lastly, I know it's been mentioned, and before I get into the broader PowerPoint discussion, I know it's been mentioned through Joe Hedges in his F&A committee report, but as we are moving forward on environmental review approvals, we are now working in that space under the NEPA assignment from the federal government, and I do believe that's having efficiency benefits for us as we go forward. And I do want to tell the board and make sure that you're all aware that by the time you all meet again, we'll have approved the ROD for the Bakersfield extension, and following that will be the ROD for the Y that'll come in 2020. Shortly after that will be Burbank to Palmdale. So I'll go through the environmental schedule momentarily, but mostly I wanted to say that we are putting that new assignment to work. We're finding some efficiencies in that process. We are having to make up some time from the period where we had some disengagement from our federal partners, but now that we're past that and working together on that, again, the next thing coming up will be the ROD for the extension into Bakersfield, and that will be done by the time we meet again. So I just want to clarify that point. Okay. With that, members, I wanted to roll into this PowerPoint presentation that is one that I originally came up with mostly because we are having a lot of conversations about where we are and what's next, and a lot of focused dialogue about how we are not moving forward in the valley itself. And I just thought it's worthwhile to remind folks, zoom out a little bit from just the valley itself and remind folks where we are as a system and as an authority consistent with the mission that we've been asked to perform on behalf of the people of California through the approval of Prop 1A. So rolling through the document here, I first wanted to just revisit some of our key issues and the way we move forward. The first is, what is the mission of the High-Speed Rail Authority? This is articulated both in the Bond Act and in our enabling statutes, and it's reiterated in some level at the cap and trade section of law that appropriates money to this project. And in essence, it's to initiate the construction of a high-speed train system that utilizes an alignment and technology capable of sustained speeds of 200 miles per hour or greater. Because we have never had every dime we need in hand to build all the system at one time, this board has adopted 3 principles for going forward. Initiate high-speed rail service in California as soon as possible. Make strategic concurrent investments that will be linked over time and that provide mobility, economic, and environmental benefits at the earliest possible time. And position ourselves to construct additional segments as funding becomes available. As you can see on that, before I move slides here, as you can see on that, the section in blue on the map on slide 2 is, in essence, the phase 1 Prop 1A a segment from San Francisco connecting all the way into Los Angeles and Anaheim. Okay. I wanted to give a snapshot of about where we are today, and that is slide 3. We move forward in the valley connecting the cities of Merced, Fresno, and Bakersfield, and some of the other stops in between. And you consider that we are already in construction on the electrification of the Caltrain system in the peninsula, and the emergence of a new and important player in Southern California. We have 350 miles of electrified high-speed rail under development in California today. The dotted lines on that map reflect where we are still working on the environmental process. And so in the middle of 2020, again, we'll have cleared the section from Madera to Merced will have cleared into Bakersfield. We are in construction in the San Francisco to San Jose stretch for electrification. And the new operators, again, two big changes on the Virgin train line that are worth talking about because it's an important element of bringing electrified high-speed rail to all Californians up and down the state, are really changes that occurred on that project. The first is a key ownership change. In the prior issue, there was really an ownership team that did not have a lot of depth in the area of transportation. Fundamental business structure was elsewhere. Now they brought into line Brightline Trains, who operates trains in Florida, and of course Virgin Trains, Richard Branson and his firm, who are established in the airline industry. So at the top of that organization are reputable folks in the transportation sector. The second important decision that they made there was, for a long time they had talked about using diesel trains for that service. And they have now turned to a commitment to electrified high-speed trains that can now travel at speeds in excess of 150 miles an hour and would be fully electrified. So that's what 2020 looks like. We jump ahead 18 to 24 months, and this is now slide 4. By 2022, under our federal funding agreement, you'll see here that we are ahead of schedule on all of the environmental documents under that agreement. The now dark blue lines on this map are now the completed environmental review for all of Phase 1 for high-speed rail. So again, I think it's important to reiterate, in the next 18 to 24 months, we will have environmentally cleared the entire 520-mile section of the Phase 1 high-speed rail system from San Francisco to Anaheim.
Brian?
Yes.
Is that part of the federal requirements as well?
It is.
Okay.
By the end of 2022.
Thank you.
Yes. So all 520 will be environmentally cleared. 350 miles could be under full construction. The intention of the Virgin train system is to break ground as early as 2020. They see a construction horizon of approximately 4 years. As you know, the Caltrain electrification would be close to completion by 2022, and we would be in full construction on that Central Valley stretch in the middle of the state. So again, 350 miles under construction, 520 environmentally cleared. We have funding commitments to some of our station partners. We've already made substantial commitments to the Transbay Terminal in San Francisco. The Diridon Station, we are working on the planning process there. And of course, at LA Union Station, through our Bookit investments, we've invested $423 million in that station. So I wanted to just point out that there's a lot of important things moving in California when you talk about electrified high-speed rail. And again, I mentioned this new operator that is an important partner for us. The Virgin train proposal from Las Vegas to Victorville today is about a 180-mile stretch. 130 of those miles are in the state of California. It is largely being constructed on public right-of-way, and that makes me extremely jealous. Because while we are struggling through right-of-way things, they are mostly on the middle section of the I-15 corridor heading between Southern California and Vegas. And so this is truly what a P3 would look like. They are taking the investment risk in terms of liquidity and debt that they'll bring to invest in this program. They take the risk on the ridership numbers. But the state of California is a partner in very important ways here. First, they were for access to cheaper capital. They have appeared before our debt limit allocation committee and sought tax-exempt bonding authority, which was approved. They will be going to our infrastructure bank next week on October 23rd for some private activity bond approvals. The Secretary of the State of California's Transportation Agency will have to agree to the right-of-way assignment to them to construct this project. And so it is truly a P3 project in terms of they're taking the financial risk, and the state of California is helping them on the right-of-way and some of the access to cheap capital. I also want to point out that we ourselves are in a partnership with this entity. There's always been an MOU in place, even when it was before it was Virgin Trains. between the State Transportation Agency, what formerly was BT&H, and into the State Transportation Agency for the development of this system. But as recently as January of 2019, that MOU was updated. The Secretary of Transportation for the state of California signed that, as did we, as parties to upgrading that. And the important opportunities that really come into play that we want to continue to work closely with this group on are really because of their commitment to move to electrified high-speed service. We now want to evaluate opportunities with them to extend to Palmdale, interconnect with our system there. We have the ability to share information on designs, operations, ridership, construction data to evaluate interoperability and ensure that we can achieve interoperability, and evaluate and identify joint purchasing opportunities for materials and even possibly rolling stock and reservation and ticketing systems as that project develops and moves forward. So it is a very meaningful introduction of a service into Southern California region, and I think provides some opportunity for us to move forward down there on getting electrified high-speed service in the region sooner than we otherwise could. Next slide. Again, some of the important areas where we have some synergy or cooperation. We are working together now and provide opportunities to explore bringing high-speed rail benefits to Southern California sooner. The two systems do provide a synergy and potential higher ridership and other benefits greater than the sum of each system individually. Provides an opportunity to leverage joint procurement, as I mentioned. As I also said, the state treasurer and the infrastructure bank are assisting Virgin Train financing through private activity bond allocation, introducing a new funding element in the delivery of high-speed rail in California. And again, there's an opportunity to work collectively with both them, I would say San Bernardino County and Los Angeles County, on the extension from Victorville into Palmdale. As you all know, Palmdale is a key stop for us in Southern California, and while they primarily will have the responsibility east and west out of Palmdale, we will primarily have the responsibility north and south through Palmdale. So Palmdale becomes a very important place for all of us to improve and create a connected service. I also wanted to point out that you know, as we are moving forward, it's important to note that we continue to make investments up and down the state of California outside of just the Central Valley region. And I wanted to just cover some of the things that we are doing now in Southern California that will be helpful for our service eventually. As you know, we executed an MOU last month to move forward on the funding for the LA Union Station project. This authority is $441 million, including planning and that money into the improvements of LA Union Station. We are funding to the tune of about $363 million the environmental review work for the shared corridor that we talked a lot about earlier between Anaheim and Burbank, and that is not just for our service, but also for improved services of Metrolink, Losan, and others. We are $77 million into the Rosecrans-Marquardt grade separation, and there's $398 million that had come out of Prop 1A, what's called connectivity projects in Southern California. And so we have an ongoing investment down there today of $1.3 billion in that region today, and that puts us as part and parcel of the state of California's $4.4 billion investments in rail improvements in Southern California today, and that is resulting in about $16 billion in important improvements in that region on the transit and rail side. In Northern California and the Bay Area, likewise, we are important funding partners. As you all know, we're $714 million into the Caltrain electrification project, which is currently under construction. We are $293 million we are investing in our environmental review work for the San Jose Merced and San Francisco to San Jose segments. $84 million for the San Mateo grade separation project, currently under construction as well. And the connectivity projects from 1A as well included about $543 million in those regions. So we're $1.6 billion today in our investments in these regions outside of the Central Valley. While it's not coming, oh, there it is. Lastly, I wanted to point to where we are on the environmental process. As I pointed out earlier, in about 18 to 24 months, the entirety of the Phase 1 system will be environmentally cleared. And I can't emphasize the importance of getting that done. not just to meet our funding agreement with the federal government, but getting these environmental documents done enables us to move to the next step in the project development process. And we will certainly have funding issues to grapple with, to close these funding gaps between the Valley and Southern California and the Valley and the Bay Area. But we got to get the environmental work done so that we can further design, get on with right-of-way in the right sequence well before we get into construction, and move forward aggressively and strategically on things like utility relocations, all before we get into a new construction contract anywhere. The first place we'll have an opportunity to show that we've learned some lessons from how construction contracts were done before and what we can do now is in the Fresno to Bakersfield stretch, that stretch from Poplar down to F Street in downtown Bakersfield, because that's the rod that will be done next. And so, again, rather than stop and not proceed, we need to figure out how strategically we can go forward on the project development in that area. That will be followed by the why. This list here on slide 9 is a list in order of when the next environmental documents will come forward. Again, the Bakersfield is next and will be due in just a couple of weeks in October of this year. Central Valley Y in September of 2020. Bakersfield to Palmdale would follow that in February 2020. Palmdale to Burbank, February of 2020. San Jose to Merced, March of 2020, and San Francisco to San Jose, April of 2020. LA to Anaheim is right now scheduled for, actually, I should have slid over one more column there. That second column is when we will be introducing the draft environmental document. The completion date where we will execute the ROD is the third column over. So again, October, then you see the following dates in order. The Los Angeles to Anaheim one is, there are a couple of important things we have to work through at the Burbank Airport, and that's also the place where we are working closely with BNSF on some environmental clearance for projects that we will need to be able to expand the passenger service in that corridor. But important on this document, as you can see, while we paid some price for the disengagement from the FRA, which is defined in column 4 here, where we've had some pushback on some of the dates, you can still see we're well ahead of the 12/22 schedule for our federal requirements on the environmental document. And we'll continue to update this box as we go forward. But as Joe Hedges pointed out earlier, in stretches like Bakersfield to Palmdale, we thought it was worthwhile to take the time to talk to folks like the Cesar Chavez National Monument now on how we can work around that monument, what might make sense to have the least impact there, and work through that, take the time to work that process now, even though it cost us a couple of months, so that we don't avoid conflict and lawsuits and other things later. And that's true with some other stretches that we'll be working on further south in some of the other areas. So again, it's strategic, but as you can see, while we've had some delay in the schedule, we are on schedule for the ROD dates under our federal funding agreement, and you see the number of float months we have in each of those in the last column there. So again, we tend to sometimes get down into the narrow of what are we arguing about today, but I wanted to sort of take a moment just to say, you know, there's a lot of progress going on electrified high-speed rail in California, and it's wildly exciting because, as I said earlier, only that technology will allow us to transform the way people move and achieve the speeds that we are mandated to achieve under state law today. And so, and I wanted you all to see that even though we've had some movement in the environmental dates, we're well ahead of schedule, and we will deliver those under our funding grant agreement. So with that, I'm happy to stop and answer any questions.
Just a quick question?
Yeah.
And good job on moving the ball on these, because again, the mission critical. 3 segments, San Jose, Merced, Bakersfield, Palmdale, and Palmdale, Burbank, are the tunnel areas, and that would all be part of the environmental.
Danny, can you say it one more time?
The 3 segments that I just mentioned, San Jose, Merced, Bakersfield, Palmdale, Burbank, those are the tunnels that we're going to be.
Primarily, yes.
That's part of the report, right? Environmental impact report?
Yes, absolutely, yes.
Okay. Any other comments or questions, Brian? Okay, Thank you. It's very helpful to have a.
Thank you, Mr.
overview
Chairman and
update.
members. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. We will move quickly to Finance and Audit Committee. I know, Tom, most of us were in that discussion. Is there anything you'd like to report out?
I don't think so, Mr. Chairman, other than the comment I made earlier with regards to the business case report for Bakersfield Merced. So I think that's really it. Thank you.
Okay, great. Any other items? Okay, then we will move to a brief closed session and then return to adjourn the meeting. There's nothing to report from the closed session, and the meeting is adjourned.